Why would an inactive pill with no real medicine in it at all start working better in 2020 than it did in 1990? That's a real question researchers are still trying to answer, and the leading explanations are stranger than the question itself. Here's what a placebo actually is, stripped down to basics. It's a substance with no active therapeutic ingredient, typically a sugar pill or saline injection, given to one group in a clinical trial so researchers can measure how much of a treatment's effect comes from the drug itself versus everything else surrounding it. For decades, placebo groups showed a fairly consistent, modest improvement across most trials, enough that researchers always had to account for it, but stable enough that it rarely complicated the science. Then, starting in the late 1990s and accelerating through the 2000s, something changed. A team led by researcher Jeffrey Mogil at McGill University analyzed decades of clinical trial data for pain medications and found that placebo responses in American trials had grown substantially stronger over time, to the point where, in some recent studies, the gap between the placebo group and the actual drug had narrowed dramatically. In certain trials, new pain medications that would have easily cleared approval thresholds decades earlier were failing to outperform placebo by a meaningful margin. Not because the drugs had gotten worse, but because the placebo had gotten better. This wasn't a fluke in one or two studies. The trend showed up across a wide range of pain trials conducted over a 20-plus year period. Picture two patients enrolled in nearly identical pain trials 20 years apart. Both are given the exact same inert pill. Both are told, in almost the same words, that they have a 50% chance of receiving a real painkiller. The 1990s patient reports a mild, modest reduction in pain, the kind researchers had come to expect and quietly factor into their calculations. The 2015 patient, given nothing chemically different, reports a reduction nearly twice as large. Same inert substance. Same basic instructions. A very different result, separated only by time. Here's where it gets stranger. This effect appears almost entirely limited to trials conducted in the United States. The same analysis found that placebo response rates in trials conducted in Europe and Asia over the same time period stayed relatively flat. Whatever is driving this shift isn't a universal biological phenomenon happening to human brains everywhere. It's tied to something specific about the conditions under which American trials are run. Researchers have a few leading theories, and none of them fully close the case on their own. The first points to trial size and duration. Modern pain trials in the US have grown considerably larger and longer than trials conducted decades ago, sometimes involving more frequent interactions between participants and clinical staff, more detailed check-ins, and more sustained attention paid to each patient's reported symptoms. Some researchers argue that this increased contact itself may be therapeutic, regardless of what pill the patient is actually taking. More attention, more perceived care, and more frequent reassurance from clinicians could be acting as a kind of hidden treatment layered on top of the placebo pill itself. The second theory points toward advertising. The United States is one of only 2 countries in the world that allows direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising, meaning patients regularly see commercials promising dramatic relief from specific medications. Some researchers suspect that decades of exposure to increasingly confident, high-production pharmaceutical marketing may have shifted public expectations about how effective medical treatment in general should feel, and expectation is one of the most well-established drivers of placebo response. If patients now walk into a trial already primed to expect strong relief, a placebo pill handed to them under clinical conditions may trigger a stronger response simply because the surrounding cultural expectation of "this should work" has intensified. A third theory is more structural. As trials have grown more expensive and competitive to run, some researchers have pointed to shifts in how trial sites recruit participants and manage patient reporting, suggesting that changes in trial design and patient selection over the decades may be partially, though not entirely, responsible for the shift, independent of any real change in how the human brain responds to expectation. None of these theories has been proven sufficient on its own, and most researchers studying this now believe the real answer involves some combination of all three, compounding on each other in ways that are difficult to fully untangle from existing data. What makes this more than just a curiosity for statisticians is the practical problem it's creating. Pharmaceutical companies now have to design and fund larger, more expensive trials just to detect a real drug effect against an increasingly strong placebo baseline. Some potentially useful medications may be failing modern trials not because they don't work, but because the bar the placebo has set has quietly moved higher than it used to be. This has led some researchers to argue that placebo response itself should be treated as a variable actively evolving over time, one that needs to be tracked and adjusted for in ongoing research rather than assumed to be a fixed, stable background number. There's a broader implication buried in this too, one that goes beyond clinical trial design. If a chemically inert pill can produce a measurably stronger physical response simply because of shifting cultural expectation, care, and attention surrounding it, that says something significant about how much of what people experience as physical relief is genuinely shaped by belief, context, and perceived attention. Not as a character flaw or a sign that the original pain wasn't real, but as a demonstrated feature of how the human body actually responds to its environment. The placebo effect was never really nothing happening. It was always something happening, just not the something the pill itself was designed to do. The honest answer at this point is that nobody fully knows why this specific trend is accelerating in one country and not others, or exactly how much of it comes from trial design versus advertising versus something else researchers haven't isolated yet. What is clear is that an effect once treated as a stable background number to be subtracted out of the data has become something stranger. A moving target, quietly getting more powerful, for reasons medicine is still trying to catch up to.